Miss Julia, why don't old people have anyone to play with? The question came from a 5-year-old with paint-smeared sleeves, soft as a breeze, but it left Julia frozen for a few seconds. Julia Simmons, lead teacher of the Rainbow Stars preschool class at Maple Hill Elementary, had heard her fair share of odd, innocent questions. But this one, uttered by Liam, a small-framed, curly-haired boy, who often stared out windows, felt different. She knelt beside him and gently asked, "What made you wonder that, sweetheart?" Liam didn't look up. He was still adding green brushstrokes to his watercolor, a quiet scene of a park bench, with a white-haired woman sitting alone beneath a tree. "We passed an old people's place yesterday. With my mom," he replied. "The grandmas there just sat really still. Nobody was smiling." Julia stared at the painting. It wasn't sad. It was quiet. Too quiet. That evening, after the students had gone home and the classroom lights had dimmed, Julia stayed behind. She sat alone at the back of the room watching the orange sunset spill across the art table. Liam's drawing still sat there. The empty space on the bench next to the old woman felt heavier than color could explain. Something stirred in Julia's chest. She opened her laptop. She didn't know what she was searching for, but her fingers typed intergenerational therapy, and that's when she found the article about Willow Creek. Headline: When music woke the room, how a young nurse helped a nursing home. Remember Joy? The story followed a nurse named Clara who had revived a forgotten nursing home with nothing but a dusty piano and a lot of heart. There was Adelaide, an elderly pianist who hadn't touched keys in decades. A man named Mr. Whitaker who wrote letters to his daughter every Sunday, never mailing them. And the Rainbow Stars, a preschool class who had written letters that somehow broke the silence. Julia read the article 3 times. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't dramatic, but it reached her. It reminded her of her grandmother who had knit blankets for half the neighborhood and passed away with no one but Julia at her bedside. That kind of loneliness Julia couldn't erase, but maybe she could interrupt it. The next morning, Julia printed the article and taped it beside the classroom's Rainbow Stars of the Week board. Below it, she wrote, "Kindness is the one gift that always grows." During nap time, when the children were bundled in their cots, she stepped into the hallway and made a call. Willow Creek Nursing Home, chirped a cheerful voice on the other end. "Hi," Julia began. "I'd like to speak with Nurse Clara if she's available." "One moment. She's just finishing up a piano session with Mr. Whitaker," the receptionist replied. A few minutes later, a new voice came on, gentle, warm, and calm. "This is Clara." "Hi, Clara," Julia said. "My name is Julia Simmons. I'm a preschool teacher, and I just read something that made my heart want to do something big." A pause, then Clara chuckled softly. "You must have read the article about the piano and the kids." "That's the one," Julia replied. "I don't know where to begin, but I have 22 tiny hearts in my class, and I believe they could make something even bigger than music happen." Clara's answer was simple, soft, but unforgettable. "Then let's start the music in your hallway first." Over the next few days, Julia began preparing her classroom. She rolled out the reading carpet and strung photos of smiling grandparents across the wall. She told the children stories, not sad ones, but beautiful ones. About Adelaide and her piano. About a grandpa who wrote letters every Sunday. About a doll named Lucy. She didn't paint pictures of pity, she taught them light. When she finished, she sat cross-legged on the rug and asked, "Would you like to be the reason someone smiles again?" Every child shouted yes. Emma, a bright-eyed girl in purple overalls, raised her hand. "Miss Julia, do we need to wear jackets? What if the old people live in a freezer?" Julia burst out laughing, wiping away a tear. "No, sweetie," she said. "They live in a place that gets warmer when we bring love with us." Clara had just finished wiping down the piano keys when the front desk buzzed her room. "There's a teacher on the line asking for you," the receptionist said. "From Maple Hill Elementary. She sounds excited." Clara smiled faintly. These days she welcomed surprises. She picked up the phone and answered with her usual warmth, "Willow Creek." "This is Clara." A bright, steady voice responded. "Hi, Clara, I'm Julia Simmons, a preschool teacher. I just read something that made me feel like I couldn't sit still another day." Clara blinked, wiping her hands on a folded towel. "Oh, I read about your piano program," Julia continued. "And the visits, the letters, the healing. And I thought, what if my kids could be part of that? I have 22 students. All heart. I think they'd love to visit if you'd be open to it." Clara leaned back against the wall. Just hearing the words "all heart" made her chest tighten in the best way. "How old are they?" she asked. 4 and 5, Julia replied. Clara exhaled. "Then yes, let's find a way." That afternoon, Clara stood in the Willow Creek staff kitchen, stirring sugar into her tea. Nurse Hannah sat beside her, scribbling on a clipboard. Preschoolers, Hannah asked with a raised brow. Clara nodded. It might be just one visit to start, but Julia sounded like someone who's not looking for a checkbox. She's looking for meaning. Hannah sipped her coffee. You think the residents are ready for all that energy? Clara thought about Adelaide, about Mr. Alvarez, about the gentle hush that usually fell over the halls. And then she thought about the sound of 20 tiny feet pattering across tile, laughter bouncing off the walls, tiny hands offering paper flowers. I think we're overdue for it, Clara said. Meanwhile, in the Rainbow Stars classroom, Julia was at the whiteboard writing, "Visit to Willow Creek Tuesday." The children were abuzz with questions. Do they have candy there? Will there be a playground? Can we bring our own drawings? Do old people like dinosaurs? Julia tried to answer as many as she could, but paused at the last one. She crouched down next to Kayla, who had asked about the dinosaurs. Do you like dinosaurs? Julia asked. Kayla nodded. I have a big green one. He's brave. Well, Julia said maybe someone at Willow Creek needs something brave today. Would you like to bring it for them? Kayla grinned. Even if it's not real. Especially if it's not real, Julia replied. That night, Julia packed her bag with extra tissues, Band-Aids, hand sanitizer, and a backup snack kit labeled Emergency Cuddles. Do not open unless absolutely necessary. She couldn't sleep. She thought about the phone call, about Clara's calm voice, about the moment Liam had asked her that simple, world-stopping question, why don't old people have anyone to play with? She wasn't sure what tomorrow would look like, but she knew one thing: hearts this young had a way of finding cracks in even the hardest walls and pouring sunlight through. Tuesday morning arrived like a bell. Julia helped buckle each student onto the yellow bus. Parents waved, some cried. One mom shouted no candy after 2 p.m. The bus rolled through suburban streets, each child clutching something they had chosen. A drawing of flowers, a folded letter saying, "You are my best friend," a toy duck named Bubbles, a paper bracelet, a dinosaur. Liam sat near the front holding a framed copy of his watercolor painting, the one with the old woman on the bench beneath a tree. Julia sat beside him. You okay? She asked. He nodded, then looked up. Do you think she's there? Julia smiled. Maybe, or someone just like her. At Willow Creek, Clara gathered the residents who had signed up to attend the visit in the lounge. The piano had been polished. Extra chairs were placed in a circle. The room smelled like lemon and lavender. Mr. Whitaker sat in his usual spot wearing a tie with cartoon dogs on it. Mrs. Jenkins had braided Lucy's yarn hair. Even Mr. Alvarez wore a red scarf he hadn't touched in years. Are we ready for a little chaos? Clara asked. Adelaide, seated near the window, looked over her glasses. As ready as we'll ever be. Then the doors opened, and 22 hearts came in holding gifts, smiling wide and looking at the world like it was still full of magic. The room was quiet, not tense, but filled with that fragile hush that happens right before something important begins. Clara took a small step back, letting the children have the moment. The rainbow stars, barely up to the hip of most adults, stood in a scattered semicircle, eyes wide and clutching their little gifts. Across from them sat the residents of Willow Creek, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on canes, some holding warm tea in paper cups. All of them watching. It was Liam who moved first. Still holding the framed painting of the old woman on a bench, he walked forward slowly. His hand trembled just slightly. He stopped in front of Mrs. Alvarez, who had curled white hair and deep creases of quiet wisdom on her face. I made this, Liam said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. It's a picture of someone waiting, but I think she might be happier now. Mrs. Alvarez reached out her fingers, thin and trembling, and gently touched the edge of the frame. She is, she said after a long pause, because someone saw her. That one sentence opened a door no one could close. Kayla stepped up next, handing her green plastic dinosaur to Mr. Whitaker. This is Bumpy. He's brave. He can protect you if you're scared. Mr. Whitaker blinked behind his thick glasses, then let out a laugh so full and deep it startled even himself. I haven't had a bodyguard in years, he said, placing Bumpy carefully on his knee. But he's hired. Laughter trickled through the room, soft at first, then growing. The children moved freely now, approaching with drawings, with hand-folded notes, with questions that had no filter. Did you have a dog when you were little? How many birthdays have you had? Do you like cupcakes? Adelaide sat back in her chair, smiling faintly. She didn't speak, but she watched every moment, every child, and her fingers tapped silently against the armrest, in time with the rhythm of voices. Clara stood next to Julia in the corner, observing it all unfold like a scene from a story they hadn't written, but were now living. They're not afraid, Clara whispered. Julia nodded. Children never are until we teach them to be. Clara turned. They're exactly what we needed. I just didn't know how much. Julia smiled. Neither did I. On the far side of the room, a girl named Zoe sat beside Mr. Alvarez. Her knees crossed, her shoelaces untied. What's in the notebook? She asked, pointing to the small leather-bound journal he kept by his side. Mr. Alvarez looked down at it. It's where I write things I don't say. Zoe thought for a moment, then said, like when I'm mad, but I don't tell my mom. He chuckled. Yes, exactly like that. Can I write something in it? He paused, then handed it over. Zoe took a purple crayon from her pocket and scribbled something on the first blank page. She handed it back, grinning. When Mr. Alvarez opened it later that night, it read, I like your wrinkles. They look like maps. Near the piano, Liam had now found his way to Adelaide. He stood close, silent for a moment. Then did you used to play? Adelaide raised an eyebrow. What makes you ask that? Because your fingers are tapping, like mine do when I want to color. She looked down at her hands, betrayed by age but still remembering rhythm. I did play, she admitted. Would you play now, he asked. There was no challenge in his voice, just wonder. Adelaide hesitated. Her gaze drifted to Clara, who met her eyes and nodded softly. Adelaide leaned forward, stood with effort, and took Liam's hand. Only if you promise not to judge me for playing like an old lady. I won't, Liam said. I'll just listen like a friend. Adelaide sat at the piano. She didn't need sheet music. The melody came from a place deeper than memory. As the notes filled the room, the children stopped moving. The residents straightened in their chairs. Even the walls seemed to lean in. She played slow, honest, not perfect. And that was what made it beautiful. When she finished, the room didn't erupt. It breathed. Then Liam clapped. Once, then twice. The others joined, not in noise, but in warmth. Adelaide turned to him and said, You listen very well. Liam beamed. I had a good teacher. It began with a quiet knock on the piano lid. Clara turned and found Zoe, 6 years old, red-haired and fearless, standing next to Adelaide's bench. Can I play something too? She asked. Adelaide looked up amused. Do you know how? Zoe held up her hand. Not with both, just this one. My brother says it's my music hand. Adelaide scooted over and patted the bench beside her. Let's test that theory. Zoe climbed up, feet swinging off the edge. Her tiny finger pressed a single key, then another, then a third, accidentally pressing 2 at once. She giggled. Oops, that one was a surprise note. Adelaide chuckled. Some of the best ones are. Clara watched as the old pianist and the little girl sat side by side, weaving music out of curiosity and courage. It wasn't a song anyone knew, but it didn't need to be. It was enough that they were playing it together. Across the room, Julia sat on the floor beside Mr. Alvarez. He had opened his journal again, not to write, but to show. These pages, he said, turning them gently, are full of things I was too scared to say aloud. Julia glanced at the neat looping handwriting. Some entries were single lines. Others were entire paragraphs. One just said, I miss who I was. She touched the edge of the page. Do you want someone to read them someday? He paused. I think I want someone to feel them. A few feet away, Kayla was teaching Mrs. Jenkins how to high-five Lucy the doll. It's okay if she misses, Kayla said. I'll catch her hand. Meanwhile, Mr. Whitaker had become quite taken with Bumpy the dinosaur. He held it like a precious artifact, balancing it on his lap, adjusting its tiny plastic arms to make it look more dignified. Liam approached him again, this time with no painting, just questions. What do you do all day? He asked. Mr. Whitaker thought. I wait. I think. I watch birds outside my window. I write letters I don't send. Liam frowned. Why don't you send them? Because sometimes the writing is more important than the reply. Liam looked down at his own hands, then back up. I could send one for you, if you ever want. Mr. Whitaker didn't speak. He just nodded, then very slowly reached out and squeezed the boy's hand. As the visit neared its end, Clara gathered everyone in a loose circle. Some sat, some stood. Some leaned into each other the way people do when space is small but hearts are open. Before you go, Clara said gently, would any of you like to share something you felt today? Silence. Then Zoe raised her hand. My cheeks hurt from smiling too much. The room erupted with laughter. Kayla added mine too, but also here. She pointed to her chest. Adelaide spoke next. I remembered something I hadn't felt in years, being looked at. Like I still mattered. Julia glanced at Clara, who was blinking quickly. Mr. Alvarez spoke last. Today I didn't just feel old, I felt seen. Clara closed the circle with a quiet promise. You're all invited back, anytime. On the bus ride home, the rainbow stars were unusually quiet. Some clutched small gifts given to them, knitted bracelets, old pins, handwritten notes. Liam stared out the window, the sky turning gold as they passed trees bending in the wind. He leaned toward Julia and whispered, "Do you think they'll remember us?" Julia nodded. "I think they'll remember how they felt. And they'll think of you every time they smile without meaning to." Liam smiled back just a little. That night at Willow Creek, something changed. The piano remained open. The journal pages remained out. The residents didn't retreat behind closed doors like usual. Instead, they lingered, talked longer, laughed softer. And just before lights out, Clara noticed something odd on the bulletin board. Someone she didn't know who had taped up a new sign made of construction paper, the kind only kids would use. It read, "We'll come back next Tuesday. Don't forget us. We won't forget you. Rainbow stars." It was the next Tuesday when it truly began. At exactly 9:45 a.m., Mr. Whitaker asked Nurse Hannah if his tie looked trustworthy enough. Clara caught him adjusting it 3 different times. Mrs. Jenkins arrived early in the lounge, doll in hand, and asked 3 separate staff members, "Do you know what time the little ones get here?" Even Mr. Alvarez, who rarely made eye contact before noon, stood by the window holding his journal with 2 hands as if it might escape. And Clara sat at the piano tapping soft scales into the morning air, not practicing, just filling the room with expectation. At 10 sharp, the yellow school bus pulled into the lot again. This time, no one needed prompting. The residents rose. Clara held the door, and 22 children spilled inside, faster, braver arms outstretched and ready. Zoe ran up to Adelaide immediately. "I practiced this," she shouted, then played 3 uneven notes before sliding off the bench in giggles. Adelaide shook her head. Terrible form, but perfect heart. Kayla beelined to Mrs. Jenkins, who held Lucy out with both hands. "She missed you," Mrs. Jenkins said. Kayla answered by giving the doll a Band-Aid. Mr. Whitaker lifted Bumpy the dinosaur like a trophy. "He survived a whole week here," he said proudly. "Taught 2 aides not to speak during bingo." Liam didn't say much that day. He just sat beside Mr. Alvarez and listened as the man read from his journal. It wasn't poetry, it wasn't a story. It was a list of dreams he'd once had and one new one. To be someone a child misses. Liam whispered, "I would." Meanwhile, Julia and Clara stood near the corner just like before, but something had shifted. It wasn't new anymore. It was familiar. "Tuesday feels different now," Julia said softly. Clara nodded. "It's become a word for hope around here." They shared a smile. A child in the background screamed joyfully. A cup spilled. Someone sang off-key. And no one seemed to mind. That afternoon, as the children left, Clara walked past the memory wall and stopped. Someone had pinned a new photo, one taken during last week's visit. Adelaide at the piano. Liam sitting beside her. Zoe clapping with wild abandon. Above it, a small sign written in crayon. "We made today better. Let's do it again." That night, Clara wrote an email she hadn't expected to write. Subject line: proposal, intergenerational music and memory pilot. She sent it to the director of the Senior Care Network. Inside, she outlined what was happening at Willow Creek. No charts, no studies, just stories. About how Mrs. Jenkins was now asking about next Tuesday in place of her usual weather question. How Mr. Alvarez had written more in 1 week than he had in 6 months. How Mr. Whitaker, who once refused assistance, now welcomed it because help means "I'll be ready in time." And how Adelaide, after years of silence, was composing again. Clara ended the email with 1 sentence. "We've stopped counting heartbeats. We've started listening to them." Back at Maple Hill Elementary, the rainbow stars were also changing. Julia had introduced a new part of the day called Heart Time, 15 minutes after snack, where students could write, draw, or share something they wanted to bring to Willow Creek the next week. Emma made bookmarks with smiley faces. Aiden drew comic strips about a superhero called Captain Walker. Zoe asked Julia, "Can I take a picture of my piano hand? I want to show Miss Adelaide it's still working." Julia said yes, and then tucked away the question Zoe had asked softly while painting. "If they don't have grandchildren, can we be there some?" On the following visit, Clara brought a surprise. "Adelaide, someone wanted you to have this," she said, handing her a large envelope. Adelaide opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything. Inside was a hand-drawn piece of sheet music titled "Song for Miss Adelaide," in Zoe's notes only. It had 1 key drawn over and over against some random scribbles, and at the top a dedication. "To the lady who showed me how music feels like stories." Adelaide stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just placed it gently inside her own music folder next to Debussy and Chopin. Zoe asked, "Will you play mine next week?" Adelaide looked at her eyes soft. "I already have," she said. The next Tuesday, Adelaide didn't come to the piano room right away. She usually arrived 10 minutes early, always with her music folder tucked neatly beneath her arm, her cardigan pressed and buttoned to the top. But this time she stayed in her room, hands folded eyes, watching the wind rustle the tree just outside her window. The sheet music Zoe had drawn song for Miss Adelaide was resting on her lap. Adelaide ran her fingers across the crayon notes. There was no melody to follow, no time signature, no right way to play it. It was in every sense chaos. And yet it had meant more to her than any award she'd received on a polished stage in her youth. Clara knocked once and stepped inside. "She's asking about you," Clara said gently. Adelaide raised an eyebrow. "Zoe." Clara nodded. "She brought a recorder. Wants to record you so her cat can hear music too." That earned a faint smile. "I don't want to disappoint her," Adelaide said softly. "But I can't play what's not written." Clara walked over, knelt beside her, and whispered, "Then maybe it's time to stop playing what is written." Meanwhile, in the lounge, Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a small plastic recorder in both hands. It had pink stars and a broken lanyard. "She's not here," she said to Clara when she returned. "She's on her way," Clara promised. Zoe looked worried. "Do you think maybe my music was too silly?" Clara shook her head. "No, I think it was too real." 10 minutes later, Adelaide entered the room not with her usual grace, but with a quiet determination. She approached the piano, placed Zoe's paper gently on the stand, and took her seat. Without a word, she began to play. There were no familiar notes, no famous composers. She played slow, searching chords. A melody stumbled, then found its footing. It was raw, uneven, beautiful. Zoe watched her recorder forgotten in her lap. Other children gathered nearby. Even Mr. Alvarez closed his journal. Mr. Whitaker turned down his hearing aid's volume, not off just enough to let the music fill the space without the buzz. When Adelaide finished, the room stayed quiet. Then Zoe whispered, "You heard it." Adelaide smiled, "Because you wrote it." Later that day, Julia and Clara sat in the garden behind Willow Creek. "I keep thinking this is a one-time magic," Julia said. "But it keeps happening again." Clara nodded. "It's not magic, it's presence. It's the one thing this place has lacked for too long." Julia leaned back against the bench. "I thought I was teaching my kids something. But they're the ones doing the teaching. They're reminding us what we forgot," Clara said. "To let things be messy, to let joy be small and loud at the same time." Back inside, Mr. Alvarez called Liam over. "I wrote something," he said, "but I want you to read it." Liam took the folded paper, straightened it in his lap, and began. "There's a song we don't know how to sing. It's written in chalk, in toy blocks, in paper crowns. We hear it in giggles and questions, in tiny hands that touch our tired ones without asking. It's not written on paper. It's written on us." Liam looked up. "Did you write that?" Mr. Alvarez nodded. "But you helped me remember it." In the following days, something shifted at Willow Creek. Residents began requesting music time. Staff noticed fewer signs of agitation. Meals were shared more slowly with more conversation. Even Mrs. Hargrove, who rarely remembered what day it was, asked Clara, "Did the music girl come yet?" "You mean Zoe?" Clara asked. Mrs. Hargrove smiled. "Yes, Zoe, I remember her." That one sentence made Clara step into the supply closet and cry happy tears for once. The next time the rainbow stars came, Zoe brought something new. She handed Adelaide a small handmade music book. It had 5 pages. Each page had one giant letter written in marker Z to OE and 2 pages blank. "What's this?" Adelaide asked. Zoe grinned. "That's my album. You get to write the last 2 songs." Adelaide stared at the pages. "No rules?" she asked. "Nope," Zoe said. "Just love." The week after Adelaide played Zoe's unwritten song, something unexpected happened. Clara received a phone call from a nursing assistant at a different facility across town. "Hi, I'm not sure if this is strange," the woman said, "but one of our residents saw a video something with kids and a piano and she cried. Then she asked if we could do the same." Clara blinked. "Do the same. Bring the kids or the music or the feeling, whatever that was." She just kept saying that felt like living again. Clara sat down slowly. She had never intended for it to go beyond Willow Creek. But then again, neither had the music. Meanwhile, Julia sat in her classroom watching her rainbow stars quietly finger paint. Liam was drawing another bench beneath a tree this time, with 2 people sitting side by side. Zoe hummed a little tune as she dabbed yellow on the edges of a paper sun. Aiden was writing a comic strip, Captain Walker versus the Silence Monster. Julia realized something: these kids weren't just absorbing the experience, they were processing it, retelling it, rebuilding it in their language. "Do you miss them?" she asked quietly. All hands went up. Emma said, "I think about Miss Jenkins every time I see my grandma's glasses." Kayla added, "I want to bring Lucy a new dress. The old one had fuzz." Zoe asked, "Can we make music books for everyone next time?" Liam said nothing, but he folded his bench drawing in half and wrote on the outside, for the person who sat down. That Tuesday, the energy was different at Willow Creek. Not louder, not busier. Just more alive. Mrs. Jenkins wore lipstick for the first time in months. Mr. Alvarez brought an extra pen in case someone else wanted to write. Adelaide didn't just play music, she taught Zoe how to find C. Clara noticed something too. The aides moved slower when the kids were around, not out of fatigue, but because no one wanted to rush moments like these. Julia, watching it all, whispered to Clara, "We'll run out of paper before we run out of things they want to give." Clara smiled. That's the best kind of problem. At the end of the visit, Mr. Whitaker pulled Clara aside. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Would you?" he asked, nodding toward Liam. Clara walked over and gave it to the boy, who held it like a treasure. "What is it?" Liam asked. "Mr. Whitaker said you'll know when to open it." Back on the bus, Liam waited until they were halfway home. Then slowly he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter typed with shaky but deliberate hands. "Dear Liam, I used to write letters to my daughter. I stopped when she stopped replying. But I never stopped wanting to be read. Today you read me in ways no words can. So I'm starting again. Thank you for sitting down. You reminded me I still matter. Yours, Thomas Whitaker." Liam didn't cry. He just folded the letter neatly, placed it in his backpack, and whispered, "I'll write back." That night, Clara pinned a new paper to the memory wall. It wasn't artwork. It wasn't music. It was a question written in a child's handwriting. Can Tuesday happen more than once a week? By the following month, Tuesday wasn't just a day. It had become a movement. Other schools called. Other care homes reached out. The staff at Willow Creek were asked to speak at a conference titled Intergenerational Healing Through Presence. But even through all the excitement, Clara and Julia knew this was never about programs or policies or press releases. It was about Zoe's made-up sheet music, about Lucy's new dress, about Liam choosing to sit on a bench drawn in his mind and wait with someone else. On the last Tuesday of the season, the Rainbow Stars brought a gift. It was a book bound with string and decorated in glitter glue. The title was hand-lettered in uneven block letters. Things You Taught Us. Each page had one sentence, simple, honest. That wrinkles can be beautiful. That music doesn't need rules. That silence is sometimes just waiting for a hello. That grown-ups cry too, and that's okay. That stories are better when someone listens. On the last page it said, "You didn't just make Tuesdays better, you made us bigger." Adelaide placed the book next to her piano. Not on the shelf, on the keys. And that evening, she played every single child's name into a melody. Not with notes, but with love. The morning sun filtered gently through the tall windows of Willow Creek, casting golden streaks across the polished floors of the common area. The room, once filled only with the quiet hum of a television and the slow rhythm of ticking clocks, now echoed with a sound that had been absent for far too long. Children's laughter. Julia stood at the doorway with her clipboard, watching her Rainbow Stars children scatter throughout the room like rays of sunlight. She had been nervous that the novelty might wear off, that the excitement of the first visit would fade, but instead it had only deepened. The children were no longer shy observers. They were now tiny ambassadors of joy, each one forming their own unique connection with the residents. At the far end of the room, little Max was helping Mr. Henderson line up dominoes on a side table. Max, only 5, had found a special bond with the former mathematics teacher, whose sharp mind was still vibrant despite his slowing body. They rarely spoke much, but their sessions of domino building were almost sacred. One tap from Max and the entire structure would fall in a satisfying ripple, earning a rare chuckle from the normally stoic Mr. Henderson. Nearby, Anna, the shyest of the Rainbow Stars, was braiding the hair of Miss Eloise, a retired seamstress with a crown of silvery curls. On the first visit, Anna had clung to Julia's leg. Now she giggled gently as Miss Eloise told stories of the grand hats she used to make for women in Manhattan. The soft bond between them had formed over shared silence and mutual gentleness, an understanding that didn't need to be taught, only felt. Julia made her way across the room, stopping by Mrs. Goldstein's armchair. The 92-year-old had been one of the most skeptical residents when the program was first proposed. "Children are noisy," she had said. "I don't have the energy to deal with chaos." But today, as she handed a coloring book to young Leo, her gnarled hands surprisingly steady, there was a softness in her eyes. "These little ones have a way of sneaking into your heart," she whispered to Julia. "I think they've already moved in," Julia smiled. As the morning wore on, a spontaneous event began to take shape. Nora, one of the most expressive children, had discovered the upright piano in the corner of the lounge. With the boldness only a 5-year-old could have, she climbed onto the bench and began to press the keys. At first, it was random chaos, an explosion of mismatched notes. But then one of the residents called out from his wheelchair, "Play C like this." It was Mr. Lennox, who hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. Everyone turned. Nora looked unsure, her fingers hovering. "C is here," he gestured, his finger, twitching slightly in rhythm. A former jazz pianist, his hands had once danced across keys in smoky clubs in New Orleans. Now they trembled with Parkinson's. Nora found the key, like this. "Now E, G, back to C." A tune emerged, stilted, slow, but recognizable. Other residents began to hum. One started to clap. Even Nurse Clara peeked from the hallway, eyes wide with wonder. The room, once echoing with silence, now swelled with an unexpected chorus. Julia stood still, absorbing it all. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the kind of quiet awe that sneaks up when something truly beautiful unfolds. She had dreamed of this, but she never expected it to happen so soon. That afternoon, while the children gathered their drawings and said their goodbyes with tiny waves and hugs, one resident asked Julia the question that sealed the future of their visits. "Will they come back next week?" Julia smiled. "Every week." And as the doors closed behind the rainbow stars, the residents remained still smiling, still warmed not just by the sun outside, but by the presence of those little hearts that had walked in, and without asking, healed something invisible. A week later, Clara opened the staff mailbox and found an envelope with no stamp. It was hand-delivered, decorated with crooked stars and colored hearts. On the back it read, "To Mr. Alvarez, from Rainbow Stars, but mostly Liam." She smiled, turning it over in her hands. Inside was a folded letter written in thick, lopsided crayon. "Dear Mr. Alvarez, you said you used to write things you couldn't say, so I thought I would say something I haven't written yet. I'm glad you didn't stop, because when you read your dreams, I think some of them come true. From Liam, the bench boy." Clara walked the envelope to Mr. Alvarez's room, knocked once, and handed it over without a word. He took it with his usual nod, closed the door, and later that day he taped it to the inside cover of his journal, the first time he'd ever placed someone else's words among his own. In the lounge, Adelaide sat at the piano with Zoe again. They weren't playing. They were simply talking. "Do you think people forget music when they get old?" Zoe asked. Adelaide tilted her head. "I think sometimes we forget that we are music." Zoe blinked. "What do you mean?" Adelaide tapped her own chest. "Heartbeats, breath, footsteps. They all have rhythm. It's just that sometimes we stop dancing to our own tune." Zoe looked down at her shoes. "I dance with my mom when we do laundry." Adelaide smiled. "Then never stop doing laundry." Elsewhere in the room, Max was building a block tower next to Mr. Henderson's wheelchair. They had moved on from dominoes to architecture, their projects increasingly ambitious each visit. "Do you ever miss teaching?" Max asked. "I miss being heard," Mr. Henderson replied. Max placed a block carefully. "I'm hearing you right now." The old man chuckled. "You are, aren't you?" Max didn't say anything else. He just kept building higher and higher until the topmost block wobbled and tipped. Mr. Henderson reached out surprisingly fast and caught it before it fell. "You've got good reflexes," Max grinned. Turns out Mr. Henderson said some things don't retire. Meanwhile, Julia and Clara stood at the new bulletin board they had just installed by the entrance. It was labeled, "What We Took Home." Pinned to it were photos drawn by the children of things they'd learned. A cane with a lightning bolt, because Mr. Whitaker walks like a hero. A piano with wings, because music flies out of it. A cup of tea labeled "Warm like Adelaide's hands." Julia stared at one drawing in particular. It was a picture of a very small child holding hands with a very large figure, both surrounded by stars. The caption read, "Sometimes grown-ups need hugs too." Julia exhaled slowly. "They get it." Clara nodded. "They always did." That afternoon, something happened that neither woman expected. A young woman in a suit came through the front doors holding an iPad and a clipboard. "I'm from the District Senior Care Board," she said. "We've received a number of stories." Clara exchanged a look with Julia. "Good stories." The woman smiled. "Let's just say your piano is famous." She walked through the center, interviewing residents, taking notes, asking questions. But it wasn't until she sat down with Adelaide that something truly clicked. "You've been part of this since the beginning," the woman asked. Adelaide nodded. "I was here before the piano remembered how to sing." "And how would you describe the change?" Adelaide pointed across the room to Zoe, who was holding Lucy the doll in one hand and teaching Mrs. Jenkins how to blow a kiss. That she said, "The following Tuesday, when the rainbow stars arrived, they came carrying shoe boxes." "Memory boxes," Julia explained. Each child had filled one with items they thought might make someone smile when we're not here. Bumpy, the dinosaur, got a twin. Lucy got a pair of hand-knitted mittens. Mr. Alvarez received a fountain pen along with a note that read, "You write like the sky. I wanted to give you a better cloud." The residents were stunned. Some cried, some simply hugged. One Mr. Lennox took his memory box and played a thank you note on the piano without saying a single word. That afternoon, Clara found a new letter taped to the back of the piano. It was in Mr. Alvarez's handwriting. "Dear children, you brought more than joy. You brought proof that no story ends when someone else is willing to keep reading, and we will keep reading, because now we know we're not alone in the library." It was the final Tuesday of the school year. Julia had counted them 12 Tuesdays since that first rainy morning. 12 visits. 12 days of laughter, piano melodies, spilled juice-coloring mishaps, and the kind of quiet healing that left no scars but plenty of warmth. But today felt different. Even the air seemed to carry a question. The rainbow stars stepped off the bus in matching T-shirts that read, "Little Hearts, Big Healing." Each one carried a single envelope in their hand. As they walked into Willow Creek, the residents were already waiting not just in the lounge but by the door, by the hallway walls in the garden. They had dressed up. Mr. Whitaker wore a bow tie. Mrs. Jenkins had put ribbons in Lucy's yarn hair. Adelaide wore a necklace that hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. Clara had prepared the room with care. A new sign hung above the piano, handwritten in crayon. "Thank you for listening to us." The visit began not with music but with stillness. Each child walked to the resident they had bonded with, knelt, and handed over an envelope. Inside each one was a drawing, a note, and one simple question. "Can we come back next year?" Some residents laughed. Some wiped away tears. Mrs. Jenkins held Kayla's note to her chest and said, "If I'm still here, you better." Mr. Henderson simply said, "You built something in me. Don't let it fall." Zoe climbed onto the piano bench next to Adelaide one last time. She didn't ask to play. She just said, "What happens if someone forgets?" Adelaide looked at her. "Then someone else remembers for them. Like passing a story." Adelaide nodded, exactly like that. Then she placed Zoe's fingers gently on the keys. Together, they played the first few notes of the same improvised tune they had created in week 3. And somehow both remembered the rhythm. Across the room, Clara pressed record on her phone, silently, reverently knowing this wasn't music for the internet. It was for safekeeping. Later that afternoon, the rainbow stars gathered in the garden. Julia stood in the center holding a small wooden box. "One last thing," she said. "We wanted to give something back to Willow Creek, something that will stay here." She opened the box. Inside were 22 folded pieces of paper, each one laminated, each one carrying a memory. "Mr. Whitaker, let me be brave. Miss Eloise told me I can be gentle and strong. Mr. Alvarez taught me that writing is like breathing. Adelaide showed me how to hear rain." Lucy smiled when no one else could. Clara read each one aloud. The residents listened like children at story time, eyes wide, hearts open. When the last one was read, Clara placed the memories inside a small bookshelf near the piano. Above it was a brass plate that read, "What never leaves." As the children boarded the bus one last time, Liam hesitated. He walked back toward Mr. Whitaker, who stood leaning against his cane. "I wrote back," Liam said, handing him a folded letter. Mr. Whitaker took it with trembling fingers, opened it, and read silently. Then he laughed loud, free. "What did he say?" someone asked. Mr. Whitaker smiled, reading aloud. "Dear Mr. Whitaker, you are not a letter I will stop reading. You are the kind I fold carefully and keep." The bus honked gently in the distance. Liam hugged him once. Tight. No words. And then he was gone. That night, Clara walked through the now quiet halls of Willow Creek. The coloring pages were still on the wall. The piano lid was closed but not locked. The memory shelf was lit by a small lamp. She passed Mr. Alvarez's room. He was writing. She passed Adelaide's door. Music hummed from the other side. She passed Mrs. Jenkins asleep in her chair, Lucy still clutched to her chest. And outside, a storm rolled gently, and not the loud kind. The kind that whispered stories into rooftops and carried memories through the rain. Weeks later, a new resident arrived at Willow Creek. Quiet, withdrawn. On his first day, he refused to speak, barely made eye contact. That afternoon, he wandered into the lounge. He sat near the piano, saw the sign, read the memory shelf, and picked up a drawing. It showed a wrinkled hand holding a tiny one. He smiled just slightly, then whispered to no one, "Maybe I'm not too late."